I have taught the royal children their letters, their sums, and the long gray history of the House of Harrowgate for 11 years, and in all that time I never once believed that the most important lesson would come from the smallest of my pupils, spoken in the cold of a garden neither of us wanted to be standing in. My name is Perrin Ashcombe. I keep the schoolroom in the east wing of the palace at Eldermoor, and I am not a brave man, nor a soldier, nor anything but a tutor with ink on his cuffs. So when I set down here what I saw in the autumn the intruder came, I write it as a witness only, and I give the courage where it belongs to a girl of 9 who could not sleep, to a boy of 11 who would not look away, and to a guardsman who did not move a muscle until a child told him a name. The first thing I noticed was the smallest thing, and I almost let it pass. Princess Malin would not walk across the lower garden. She was 9 that year, a quick, laughing child who had spent every fair morning since she could toddle running the gravel paths between the yew hedges, feeding the carp in the stone basin, dragging her younger brother Bram by the sleeve to show him a beetle or a fallen nest. The garden was hers the way a room is yours, known in the dark, mapped by the feet. And then, in the space of a single week at the turn of the season, she stopped. I saw it on a Tuesday. I had taken the 3 of them out after their sums, Malin, her elder brother Torin, and little Bram, because the schoolroom air had gone stale, and a tutor learns that a child who has sat still for 2 hours will learn nothing in the 3rd. Torin went ahead down the steps 2 at a time. Bram tumbled after him toward the basin, shrieking about the fish, and Malin stopped at the top of the stone stair with her hand on the balustrade and did not come down. "Come along," I said. "You'll miss the best of the light." "I'll stay here," she said. I thought little of it. Children have their moods, and the wind was up. But the next fair day it was the same, and the day after, and I began to watch her the way you watch a clock you suspect of running slow. She kept to the terrace. She kept her back to the stone wall of the wing, where the ivy grows thick over the old ice-house door, and she watched the lower garden as though it were a pond that might have something under it. I am ashamed to say my first thought was that she was being difficult, and my second was that she was sickening for something, and it was a long while before my third thought arrived, which was the correct one, that the child was afraid, and that fear in a child who has never had reason to be afraid is not a mood. It is a message. There was a man at the gate of the children's garden in those weeks who was not afraid of anything, and I want to set him down here before I set down the trouble, because the two things belong together. His name, his rank rather, for we were taught to use it, and I have used it ever since, was Sergeant Osric Fenn of the Household Guard. He had the garden gate and the corridor that ran from the schoolroom to the nursery stair, which is to say he had the children, and he had held that post for the better part of 3 years. You will have your picture of a royal guardsman already. The red wool tunic, the tall black bearskin that makes a big man enormous and an ordinary man a monument, the white gloves, the medals in their sober row, the rifle held at rest and the eyes fixed on the middle distance as though the middle distance owed him money. Fenn was all of that. He stood his hours without shifting his weight, and the tourists who were let through the outer courts on open days would stand in front of him and make their faces at him and go away defeated, because he had the trick every good guardsman has of being present and absent at once, a wall that happened to breathe. But I had the schoolroom, and I knew the other Fenn, the one the crowds never saw. I knew that when Bram fell on the gravel and split his lip, it was Fenn who was down on one knee before the nurse could cross the terrace, one white glove already stained, saying in a low, even voice that a split lip bled like a battle and healed like nothing, that the prince was a soldier now, and soldiers did not cry for their own blood, only for their friends. I knew that he could tell, from the schoolroom window 40 feet off, which of the 3 children had been crying and which had merely been arguing, and that he never once let on that he could tell. I knew that he kept, in the deep cuff of his left glove where the inspecting officer never looked, 3 boiled sweets in a twist of paper, and that these were dispensed on a system of justice so exact that even Torin, who tried the boundaries of every system he met, had given up gaming it. So there were two things in that garden as the leaves came down: a girl who would not walk across it, and a guardsman who noticed everything and was permitted to say nothing. Between them, in a manner of speaking, stood the reason for both. I will describe him plainly, though I did not know his name then and would not know it for weeks. He was a man of middle years, soft-spoken, soft-handed, dressed in the sober dark of a professional man, not a servant, not a lord, one of that class of persons a great house takes in for a season to do the exact, tedious, valuable work that great houses require. He carried a leather case of instruments and a ledger, and he wore a warrant on a ribbon about his neck, a folded paper with a seal on it, the way a man wears a warrant who wants you to see it before he speaks. He had been engaged, I was given to understand, to make an inventory. That word, inventory, hung about the east wing all that autumn like the smell of the cold rooms he worked in. For there were rooms in that wing that had been shut for 2 years, and they had belonged to the children's mother. I should say the thing I have been circling. The children's mother was the late Queen Isolde, King Alaric's first wife, who had died when Bram was 4 and Malin was 7 and Torin was 9, and whom the palace still spoke of in the careful, level voices people use for a grief that has not finished. Her rooms in the east wing had been sealed at her death, her presses, her writing room, the low blue chamber where she had kept her mother's things and her own, the jewels that were not the crown's but hers, meant by every law of the house to pass to her children when they came of age, sealed and left in grieved past. And now, 2 years on, the king had taken a second wife, Queen Consort Morwenna, and it was under the new queen's household, and the new queen's warrant, that the sealed rooms had been opened again to be counted. I am a tutor. Inventories, warrants, the counting of a dead queen's jewels, these were not my province, and I told myself so at the time, and I was wrong to, because the man with the ledger and the warrant on the ribbon was not staying in the sealed rooms where his work was. He was in the garden. He was in the corridor. He was, I came slowly and sickly to understand, wherever the children were. The first time I saw him near them, I thought nothing of it, which is the way of these things. The mind files the ordinary, and only later pulls the file and sees the wrongness in it. It was at the foot of the nursery stair. I came down with an armful of Torin's copybooks, and there he was, the soft-spoken man, standing at the turn of the stair with his ledger closed against his chest, and Malin was 3 steps above him with her back pressed to the wall, and neither of them was speaking, and the not speaking had a shape to it that I did not like even before I understood it. "Good afternoon," I said, because a tutor says good afternoon. "Good afternoon," he said and smiled, and the smile was correct in every particular and warmed nothing. The little princess and I were only saying how quiet the old rooms are. He inclined his head to Malin. Weren't we? Malin did not answer. She came up the stair fast when I put my hand out, fast and close, and went past me into the schoolroom without a word, and I heard the scrape of the chair as she pulled it hard against the far wall. I looked back down the stair. The man had already turned away, unhurried, the ledger against his chest, and he went along the corridor toward the sealed rooms with the particular quietness of a man who has decided that whatever just happened did not happen. That night Malin woke twice screaming and could not, or would not say why. Her nurse, a sensible woman named Halsey, who had raised all 3 children and buried their mother's memory in her own careful heart, sat up with her both times and came to me in the gray of the morning with her eyes ringed and her mouth set. "She says there's a man," Halsey told me. "She says he's in the garden and on the stair, and he tells her not to be a baby, that's her word. Not to be a baby and not to tell tales, and that her mother's things are his business now." Halsey folded her hands to keep them still. "I told her it was a dream, Master Ashcombe. God help me, I told her it was a dream, because what else does a person say? But she's not dreaming it. She's afraid of a real thing, and I don't know how to find it, because every time I ask her to point to it, she goes white and says she mustn't. She mustn't. There it was, the small, terrible machinery of it. Someone had taught a 9-year-old that to name her fear was to break a rule, and she was a good child, and she was trying with all her strength to be good. I did the correct things, and the correct things did nothing. I went to the controller of the household, a dry and busy man named Varric, and I told him a girl was frightened, and that there was a man about the children's wing who had no cause to be. Varric heard me out with the patience of a man who is being kept from his ledgers, and told me that the person I meant was Master Silas Rusk, a licensed valuer engaged under the Queen Consort's own warrant to complete the inventory of the late Queen's estate, that his papers were in perfect order, that his work necessarily took him through the East Wing, and that a child's night terrors, while regrettable, were a matter for the nursery and not for the household office. He said the word license twice. He said the word warrant 3 times. He did not, I noticed, say the word child at all, except to hand it back to me. So the man had a name now, Silas Rusk, and a warrant, and a place in the machine, and the machine had closed around him neatly, and I went back up the stair with nothing. It was Fenn who stopped me at the top of it. He did not turn his head. He never turned his head on post, but as I came level with him, he said, in a voice pitched to carry no farther than my ear, "The little princess used to walk to the basin and count the fish for me. 14 fish. She'd hold up her fingers." A pause, the length of a breath. "She hasn't held up her fingers in 9 days, Master Ashcombe." 9 days, he had been counting. Of course he had been counting. It was the only thing his post allowed him to do, to stand, and to count, and to notice, and to say nothing, because a guardsman does not leave his post and does not accuse a man bearing the Queen's warrant on the word of a frightened child and a tutor with ink on his cuffs. The whole weight of his discipline, which the tourists came to gawp at as if it were a kind of emptiness, I saw suddenly for what it was. A full thing, a held thing, a man standing perfectly still over a fire. "They tell me his papers are in order," I said. "I'm sure they are," said Fenn, and his eyes never left the middle distance, and something in the flatness of the 4 words told me exactly how little the order of a man's papers weighed with him against 9 days of a child not holding up her fingers. "Papers are easy to keep in order, Master Ashcombe. It's children that tell you where the trouble is, if you can get one to point at it. If you can get one to point at it." I did not understand yet that he had just told me the whole of what was coming, that the warrant would not fall to a controller or a tutor or even to a guardsman, but to a child brave enough to lift her hand and say the thing she had been taught she mustn't. I only knew, going back into the schoolroom where Malin sat with her chair against the wall and her eyes on the window, that the wrongness had a name now, and that the name had a warrant, and that between the frightened girl and the soft-spoken man with the ledger stood one guardsman who had counted 9 days and could not yet move. He would move, but it would take the other child, the one at the desk by the window, the one who had watched his sister stop walking across the garden and had said nothing to anyone, and had begun, in the silent way of a boy who is 11 and the eldest and afraid for someone smaller than himself, to keep his own kind of count. Prince Torin was the middle of my 3 difficulties as a tutor, and the hardest to reach. Malin was quick and warm and told you her whole heart before you asked. Bram was 6 and told you his heart and everyone else's at a volume that carried down 2 corridors. But Torin, at 11, had gone into himself the way boys do at that age when they have decided that the world is a thing to be watched rather than trusted. He was cleverer at sums than I let him know, for a boy who suspects he is clever becomes unbearable, and he had a stillness in him that I had never before thought to connect with the stillness of the man at the gate, though I connect them now. Where Malin ran at a thing, Torin circled it. Where Bram shouted, Torin filed. I began to notice in those same 9 days and the days after that Torin had taken to sitting at the desk nearest the window which was not his desk, and that he was doing something at it that was not his sums. He kept a slate. Every boy keeps a slate. But this slate he kept turned face down when I came near, and once, retrieving a dropped pen, I saw the underside of it before he could turn it, and there were no sums on it at all. There were marks. Little group strokes, 4 and across, 4 and across, the tally a boy makes when he is counting a thing that matters to him. And beside the tallies in his cramped, ferocious hand, times. 2:30, before the bell, when Halsey went down for the milk. He was counting the man. I did not let on that I had seen. I have thought since that this was a mistake, that if I had sat down beside that boy and said plainly, "Torin, tell me what you are counting," the whole grief of that autumn might have been shorter by a week. But I did not know then what he knew, and I did not want to frighten the one child who did not yet seem frightened, and so I let the slate stay face down, and I watched him watch, and between the three of us, the girl who would not point, the boy who tallied in secret, and the guardsman who counted fish that were no longer counted, the thing went on. It went on, and it grew, because that is what such things do when the machine has decided they are in order. The second escalation, if I am to be exact about it, came at the schoolroom door itself. Rusk had no business at the schoolroom. The sealed rooms were at the far end of the corridor. His warrant, whatever it truly covered, could not by any reading have covered the room where I taught 3 children their letters. And yet one gray forenoon I looked up from Bram's copybook to find the soft-spoken man standing in the open doorway with his ledger against his chest, looking in, and he had been standing there. I understood from the set of the children's shoulders, all 3 gone rigid at their desks, for longer than a man stands who has merely lost his way. "I beg your pardon," he said when I rose. "I heard young voices." It's a rare sound in that end of the wing. His eyes moved over the room, over the 3 children, and came to rest with a leisure that turned my stomach on Malin. "The late Queen kept a small writing box," he said to me, "but at her enamel, a bird on the lid. It is on my list, and it is not in her rooms. Children remember where their mothers kept things." The smile. "Don't they?" "This is a schoolroom, Master Rusk," I said, and I was pleased to hear that my voice was steadier than I was. "The children are at their lessons. If you have inquiries about the inventory, the controller's office is the proper channel." "Of course," he said, entirely pleasant, and did not move for the space of 3 breaths, long enough to make the point that he did not move because I asked but because he chose, and then inclined his head and went, unhurried, the ledger against his chest, back toward the cold rooms. I crossed to the door to shut it and found Finn already a half step off his post, his weight forward, his eyes, for the first time in 3 years, not on the middle distance but on the retreating back of Silas Rusk, and I watched the effort it cost him to set his weight back onto his heels and let the man go. A guardsman does not leave his post. A guardsman does not lay hands on a warranted man in a corridor on suspicion. He knew the rules better than I did. He had given his life to them. But I saw, in the half-step he took back, exactly how thin the wall had worn. "He asked her about a writing box," I said low. "I heard," said Finn. "There's no writing box on any honest list that a man needs to ask a 9-year-old about," I said, and it was the boldest thing I had said aloud in the whole business, and I regretted it at once, because saying it made it real. Finn was quiet a moment, then, "No," he said, "there isn't," and after another moment so low I nearly missed it, "He's not looking for a box, Master Ashcombe, a box you find with a list. He's looking for a child who will tell him where things are and be too frightened to tell anyone he asked. That's a different kind of inventory." His jaw moved. "I've seen the shape of it before. Not here, before." I did not ask him where. There is a country behind every good guardsman's eyes that he does not invite you into, and I had learned not to knock. But I marked the words, "I've seen the shape of it before," and I understood that the man at my gate was not merely a disciplined statue offended by a rule broken in his sight. He was a man who recognized a predator by its gait, and who was being made, by the whole weight of the household office, to stand still and watch it hunt. That evening I did the second correct thing, which also did nothing. And I record it because the doing nothing of the correct things is itself part of this story. And anyone who has ever tried to make a great house believe a child over a warrant will know the weariness of it. I went above Varick's head. I sought an audience with the person in the household whose business the children most properly were, and in the House of Harrowgate that autumn there was some confusion about who that was, and the confusion was not accidental. The children's father, King Alaric, was much away that season. There was a treaty being ground out in the west, and the king ground at it, and I do not think any man told him plainly that his dead wife's rooms were being turned out and his living daughter was waking screaming, because the persons who might have told him were the persons who had arranged it. The children's mother was 2 years in the ground. And the queen consort, Morwenna, who had married into the care of these 3 children and taken, in the eyes of the world, a mother's place at their table, was the one whose warrant hung on Sela's Rusk's ribbon. I did not go to the queen consort. I will be honest about my reasons. I was afraid to. But I had heard that the king's own sister was in residence, Princess Adela, a woman of middle years with a plain tongue and a reputation for asking the question everyone else was too clever to ask. And to Princess Adela's steward I sent, by the proper forms, a request that the tutor of the royal children might speak to Her Highness on a matter touching the children's welfare. The answer came back within the hour, and it was not the answer I had sent for. The answer came from the queen consort's household. It was courteous. It was signed by a chamberlain I did not know. And it informed Master Perrin Ashcombe that the education of the royal children did not extend to their households, their estates, or the disposition of the late queen's effects, that the tutor would confine his attentions to the schoolroom, that the inventory then in progress was a lawful and delicate matter conducted under Her Majesty's own warrant, and that any further irregular approaches to members of the royal family on the subject would be regarded as a want of discretion incompatible with a position of trust in the household. I read it twice. Then I understood the shape of the thing, and the understanding sat in me cold as the sealed rooms. It was not that no one would help. It was that someone, somewhere above me, had already reached down and closed a hand over the whole affair, had put a warranted stranger into the children's wing, and stopped the one door I had thought to knock on, and hung the word discretion over my head like a raised switch. The frightened girl, the tallying boy, the guardsman on his fraying wall, all of it was inside a fist, and the fist belonged to the household of the woman who sat in the dead mother's place. I did not sleep well that night either. In the morning I went early to the schoolroom before the children, and Fenn was already at his post in the grey, and I told him, because I had no one else to tell, and because he was the only person in the wing whose face did not change when I said a true thing. I told him about Adela's steward, and the answer that had come from the wrong household and the word discretion. He listened without moving. When I had finished, he was quiet so long I thought he would not answer at all. Then he said a thing I have never forgotten, and it is the nearest I ever heard him come to speaking against the order he served. There's a kind of order, he said, that's built to keep the strong from the weak, and there's a kind that's built to keep the weak from reaching the strong. They wear the same coat, Master Ashcombe, same words on the paper. You only find out which one you're standing inside of when a child needs help and the paper says she can't have it. His eyes were on the middle distance. His weight was on his heels. Every inch of him was a guardsman keeping his post. I've been standing my post 3 years, he said. I'll stand it 3 more, but I'll tell you the one thing that'll take me off it, and there's no warrant in the realm that outranks it. If one of these 3 points at a man and tells me true that he's the one who's frightening them, I'll act. At once. And the household can have my post and my name and whatever else it wants after. At once, he said it the way other men say amen. I did not know, standing in that gray corridor, how soon he would be held to it. I only knew that somewhere in the wing a boy was turning a slate face down over a tally of a stranger's hours, and a girl was pressing her chair to a wall, and a soft-spoken man was moving through cold rooms with a list that had a bird on a box on it, and that the whole quiet weight of the household had come down on the side of the man with the warrant. Everyone's, that is, but a tutor's who could do nothing, and a guardsman's who had just told me the one thing that could. The household made its next move against the guardsman, not against the man, and that is when I understood the true size of what we were inside of. It came as an administrative thing, which is how such moves always come, never as a blow, always as a form. A memorandum descended from the office of the Master of the Guard, countersigned in the Queen Consort's household, observing that the rotation of the household guard had grown stale, that certain sergeants had held certain posts overlong, that fresh eyes served discipline, and directing that Sergeant Osric Fenn be relieved of the East Wing gate at the turn of the month and reassigned to the outer courts, where the open-day crowds came to make their faces at the men who would not move. I heard of it from Halsey, who heard of it from the pantry, which is where a great house's true news lives, and I understood it at once for what it was, because I had by then learned to read this particular hand. Someone had noticed the guardsman noticing. Someone had seen the half-step off the post at the schoolroom door, had marked the flatness in the 4 words "papers are easy to keep in order," and had decided, with the cold economy of a person who has done this before, that the surest way to leave a frightened child undefended was not to touch the child at all. It was to move the one man who was counting her fish. I went a fen with it, and for the first time in 3 years I saw the news reach his face before he sent it away. It was there and gone, a tightening at the corner of the eye, a thing you would have missed if you had not spent 100 mornings looking for it. Then it was gone, and he was the wall again. "The turn of the month," he said, "that's 11 days. They're moving you to get you away from them," I said. "You know that." "I know that," said Finn. "Can you refuse?" "No," he said. "A guardsman doesn't choose his post. If I refuse a lawful order, I'm not a guardsman who protected the children. I'm a guardsman who wouldn't take his post, and they'll have me out the same day and put a man on that gate who's never counted a fish in his life. The order's the thing that protects them, and the order's the thing being used against them. That's how it's done, Master Ashcombe. That's always how it's done." He was silent a moment. 11 days, he said again, and I understood that he had just converted the memorandum into a clock, and that everything he did from that morning would be measured against it. 11 days for a frightened child to find her voice, or for a watching boy to find his, before the last wall in the corridor was marched off to the outer courts to be gawped at by tourists. The man Rusk, meanwhile, had grown bolder, as such men do when the machine keeps proving to them that it will not stop them. I set down 2 things from the days that followed, because they are the hinge of everything, though I did not see it then. The first was in the garden, and I had it from Bram, who at 6 could not yet be taught that some things are not to be told, and thank God for it. Thank God for the one child in that wing who had not learned discretion. Bram came up from the lower garden white and breathless one afternoon while I was hearing Torin's history, and he stood in the schoolroom door and announced, in the ringing voice of a 6-year-old delivering news, that the ledgerman had chased Malin round the ice house, and she cried, and he said she wasn't to say. I put down the history book. I got it from him in pieces, as you get anything from a child of 6, the pieces out of order, the important thing buried under the beetle he had also seen. Malin had gone down to the garden. This was itself a thing, for she had not gone down in weeks, and she had gone, I learned later, because Torin had dared her to, and because she was ashamed of being afraid and wanted to prove to her brother that she was not. She had gone as far as the stone basin, and the ledgerman had been there, at the corner of the wing by the old ice-house door where the ivy grows thick, and he had come around the hedge as she stood at the basin, and Bram's word chased her. Not run at her, I do not think. I do not think Silas Rusk ever ran at anything in his life, but moved to put himself between the child and the stair, so that to get back to the terrace she had to pass close by him, and as she passed he had bent down to her, Bram showed me, folding himself in half with his hands on his knees, a horrid unconscious mimicry, and said the thing about her mother's writing box. And when she began to cry he had said she wasn't to make a scene, she wasn't to be a baby, she wasn't to say, because it would go badly for her and worse for whoever she told. Worse for whoever she told. I understood then why she pressed her chair against the wall. She was not only frightened for herself, she had been made to believe that her fear was a loaded thing that would go off on the people she loved if she ever set it down. Halsey, Bram, me. A 9-year-old carrying that alone for weeks, because a grown man had built it into her on purpose, quietly, in a cold garden under a warrant. I went down to the garden with Bram's hand in mine and found Malin on the terrace with her back to the wall and her face scrubbed too clean, the way a child's face is when they have washed the crying off it before an adult can see. I did not ask her what had happened. I had learned that much. I sat beside her on the cold step and said only that Bram had told me he'd seen a beetle, and that I thought she was the bravest of the three of them for going down to the basin at all, and that whatever she wanted to tell me she could tell me, and whatever she wanted to keep she could keep, and that nothing she said or didn't say would go badly for anyone, because that was not how telling worked, whatever anyone had told her. She did not speak, but she leaned her head against my arm, which she had not done since she was small, and we sat like that a while in the cold, and up at the gate at the top of the terrace stair I saw Fenn standing his post, eyes forward, and I knew he had seen the whole of it, and I knew what it was costing him to stand there and let a tutor do the comforting that his rank forbade him. The second thing I set down is the tally, because it is where the boy comes into it, and the boy is the one the whole story turns on. That night Torin did not turn his slate face down when I came near. He had done a thing I had not expected. He had decided, in the way of a boy who has watched something happen to someone smaller than himself and cannot forgive himself for having dared her down the stair, that his secret count was no longer his to keep. He set the slate on my desk, faced up, and stood beside it with his jaw set exactly as I had seen his guardsman set his, and he said, "I've been watching him." I looked at the slate. It was a fuller thing than I had glimpsed, days down the side, times across. Across for every hour Sila's Rusk had been where the children were, and not where his warrant put him, the corridor, the stair, the schoolroom door, the garden, and it was not a scatter. Read down the column, it was a hunt with a shape. The man had learned the children's hours and had bent his own around them, and had been in the sealed rooms where his work was least of all. "He's not counting mother's things," Torin said. His voice was very level, and I heard under the level the enormous effort of an 11-year-old keeping it level. "He's counting us. He asks Malin where things are and she doesn't know, and he says she's lying and she's not lying. She was 7. She doesn't remember where mother kept a box. And she thinks it's her fault. She thinks she's done something." He looked at me and the level cracked for just a moment, one hairline crack, and then he shut it again with a strength I have not often seen in a grown man. "It's not her fault. I want to tell someone whose fault it is, but every time I try, the someone tells me the man's got a paper." I looked at the boy and at his slate, and at the shape of the hunt written on it in a child's hand, and I felt the ground of the whole autumn shift under me, the midpoint I would call it now, the place where the game changed. For I had been trying to make the great house believe a frightened girl who could not point, and it had beaten me every time, because a frightened girl who cannot point is exactly the kind of witness a warrant is built to override. But here was the other child. Here was Torin, who did not go white and could not be made to. Here was a witness who had watched, and reasoned and written it down, and who would, I saw it in his jaw, say a name out loud to the right person and not take it back. The trouble was that I was not the right person. I had proven that. A tutor's word died in the controller's office, and a princess's steward sent it back through the wrong household. If Torin told me, and I carried it up the machine again, the machine would grind it as it had ground everything else, and it would grind faster now that it had 11 days to run out. There was one person in the wing to whom a child's naming of a man would not be a thing to be filed. There was one person who had said in a gray corridor that if one of these three pointed at a man and told him true that he was the one frightening them, he would act at once, warrant or no warrant, post or no post. And that person was, at the turn of the month, in 9 days now, for 2 had gone, to be marched off to the outer courts to stand where he could count nothing at all. I did not tell Torin any of this. He was 11. It was not his weight to carry the politics of it. I told him only that he was right, that it was not his sister's fault and not his, that he had done a brave and clever thing to watch and to write it down, and that I wanted him to keep the slate safe and keep watching, and this above all, that if the moment ever came when he was certain, truly certain, and the right person was there to hear it, he was not to be afraid to say the name out loud. That saying it would not go badly for Malin. That saying it was, in fact, the only thing that would make it stop. "Who's the right person?" Torin asked. I looked past him, out the schoolroom window, to the gate at the top of the terrace stair, where the red tunic stood motionless in the falling light. "You already know," I said. For 3 days after that it seemed the whole thing might simply dissolve, and I confess I let myself believe it, which is the oldest mistake there is. Word came down that the inventory was nearly complete. Master Sila's Rusk was to close his ledger at the week's end and depart. His engagement was finished. The sealed rooms would be sealed again, their contents duly recorded and accounted for. The phrase had a finality to it that felt, for a day or two, like rescue. Rusk was seen less in the corridor. He kept to the cold rooms. Malin, told by Halsey that the ledgerman was going away soon, slept a whole night through, and on the 3rd morning she came to the schoolroom window, and I did not point it out to her, for fear of breaking it, held up 9 fingers, then 5, to the gate. And Fen, who was not permitted to smile on post, did not smile, but I saw his gloved hand move a half-inch at his side, which for him was an embrace. 14 fish. She had counted them again. I let myself believe it was over. It was not over. It was only that the man had found what he was truly looking for, or believed he had, and a hunter grows quiet when he thinks the quarry is his. I understood the whole of it only later, when the household's papers were opened by people with the authority to open them, but I will set it down here in its right place, so that the reader is not as blind as I was. The inventory had never been an inventory. It was a search. And the thing being searched for was not on any list Rusk would ever close his ledger over. The late Queen Isolde, in the last year of her life, had done a careful and quiet thing. She had known she was dying longer than she let the children know, and she had known her husband's grief would make him, for a time, a man who signed what was put in front of him. And so she had set down in her own hand and under her own seal a testament, that her personal estate, the jewels that were hers and not the crown's, her mother's things, the low blue chamber and all it held, were to pass to her 3 children when the eldest came of age, and to no one else, held in trust and untouched until that day. She had had it witnessed. And then, because she was a woman who had learned to distrust the fate of papers in a great house, she had not lodged it with the household or the treasury or the law. She had hidden it. She had put it, folded, inside a small enamel writing box with a bird on the lid, and she had hidden the box, and she had told one person in the world where it was. She had told her daughter. She had told Malin, who was 7 in the low blue chamber, a secret between a dying mother and a little girl, made a game of so the child would not be frightened. A hiding place, a treasure, our secret, you'll keep it for me, won't you, until you're big. Malin had kept it. She had kept it for 2 years, through the grief and the sealing of the rooms and the coming of the new queen, a secret so folded into her that I do not think she herself knew any longer that she was keeping it, only that there was a box and a bird on it, and that it was mother's and it was important and it was theirs. And a woman in the dead mother's place had wanted, before those children came of age, to be certain that testament was never found, that the estate would be duly recorded and accounted for, and quietly absorbed, the jewels reset, the trust dissolved for want of any paper proving it had ever existed. And to be certain of that, she had needed to know where the box was. And the only person alive who knew was a 9-year-old girl. That is why a soft-spoken man with a warrant hunted a child through a cold garden asking about an enamel box with a bird on the lid. Not for the box's own small worth, for the folded paper inside it that would, on the day it was read, undo a theft the size of a queen's estate. I did not know this on the fourth day. On the fourth day, I knew only that Rusk had gone quiet and Malin had counted her fish, and I let the quiet fool me, and it was the boy again who was not fooled. Torin came to me before the morning bell, and he did not have his slate, and the not having of the slate frightened me more than any tally could have. He came to the nursery last night, Torin said. The morning went cold around me. What? After Halsey went down, he came to the nursery door. I heard him. I sleep light now. I've been sleeping light for weeks, and I went to the door and it was him, and he had a candle, and he was saying to Malin through the door low, so Halsey wouldn't hear from the stair. He said tomorrow was his last day. He said this was her last chance to be a good girl and tell him where Mother's box was, and if she told him he'd go away and never come back and it would all be over. And if she didn't tell him he'd have to say to the Queen that Malin had been stealing from her own mother's rooms, that Malin was a little thief, and everyone would believe him because he had a paper and she was only a child, and she'd be sent away from us, away from me and Bram, to a place where bad children go. Torin's hands were fists at his sides, and his whole body was shaking with the effort of keeping his voice level, and he kept it level. He kept it level the whole way through, and I have never in my life been so proud of and so frightened for a child at once. She didn't tell him. She didn't open the door. She was crying and she didn't open the door and she didn't tell him, and this morning she won't get up, she won't speak. She's under the blanket with her eyes open and she won't speak to anybody. I went to the nursery. Malin was, as he said, a small shape under the blanket, awake, silent, her eyes fixed on nothing. Halsey stood by the bed wringing a cloth, undone, because a nurse who has raised a child from birth knows the difference between a child who is ill and a child who has been broken to silence, and she was looking at the second and could not reach it. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I did not ask the child a single question. I said only softly that no one was going to send her anywhere, that she was ours and she was staying ours, that no paper in the world was stronger than the three of us and Halsey and her father the king, and that whatever the ledgerman had said to her in the dark was a lie, every word of it, the lie of a frightened man who was trying to make a brave girl believe she was a bad one. She did not answer, but her hand came out from under the blanket and took hold of two of my fingers and held them, hard, the way she had held Fenn's fish count in the air, and did not let go. Today was his last day. That was the thing beating in the room. Today Silas Rusk would close his ledger and go, but he would not go empty-handed if he could help it. And a man who has spent a night threatening a child through a door with exile and disgrace is not a man who leaves quietly at the week's end. He had one day left to find the box, and he had learned that terror would not open the child, and I did not like to think what a man like that does on his last day when terror has failed. And it was, I realized, the same day by another reckoning. I went out into the corridor with the cold sitting in me, and I looked down its length to the gate, and I did the arithmetic I had been dreading, and it came out to the number I had feared. The turn of the month. 9 days had gone since the memorandum. Today Silas Rusk closed his ledger, and today, by the same order, Sergeant Osric Fenn stood his last watch on the east wing gate before the rotation marched him off to the outer courts, and put a stranger who had never counted a fish on the post between the children and the man who hunted them. The last day for the hunter, the last day for the guard, the same day. I went and stood by Fenn at the gate, and I told him quietly, in the pitch that carried no farther than his ear, everything Torin had told me. The candle at the nursery door, the threat of exile, the word thief laid on a 9-year-old, the box, the bird on the lid, and the thing I had only just pieced together, that the whole cold autumn had been one man hunting one child for one secret, because a woman in a dead mother's place wanted a paper never to be read. Fen listened without moving. He listened the way he did everything, all of it going in behind the still face and none of it showing. And when I had finished, he was silent for a long moment, and then he said, in the level voice I had come to trust more than any raised one in that whole house, "Then it happens today. He'll make his move today because it's the last day his paper's worth anything, and I come off this gate tonight." His eyes stayed forward. His weight stayed on his heels, but every word was iron. "I can't lay a hand on him on your word, Master Ashcombe, or on the boy's slate, or on the girl's silence. The household's built a wall around him, and the wall holds against all of that. There's exactly one thing the wall doesn't hold against, and it's the one thing I told you in this corridor 9 days ago." He paused. "One of them has to point at him, to me, and say he's the man, and mean it. I can act on that. On that I can act at once and let the whole household come and ask me afterward why." "Malin can't," I said. "She's been broken to silence. She thinks pointing sends her away." "Then not Malin," said Fen. And I understood, standing at that gate on the last day of everything, that there was only one child left in the wing who could do the thing the whole affair had come down to, one child who had watched, and reasoned and written it in his own hand, and who did not go white, and could not be made to. One boy, 11 years old, the eldest, who had dared his sister down a stair and never forgiven himself, and who had told me, with his jaw set like a guardsman's, that he wanted to tell someone whose fault it was. The only question left was whether an 11-year-old could be made to stand in front of a man with a warrant. On the last day the warrant could bite, and say the name out loud. I did not sleep the night before that last day. I do not think anyone in the wing did but Bram, who slept the wholehearted sleep of the 6-year-old and woke us all at dawn wanting to know why everyone else looked so gray. Some hours before that dawn, I gave up on my bed and went out into the corridor. And the red tunic was there, of course, because the guard has no bed on watch. And I stood by the gate in the dark and we talked, low. And it was the only time in 3 years the man let me into the country behind his eyes. And I set it down because it is the reason he did what he did. And a reason is worth more than a deed you cannot account for. I asked him what he had meant weeks before when he said he had seen the shape of it before. Not here, before. He was quiet a long while. On post in the dark, a man's face is only a paleness under the fur of the bearskin, and I could not read it, and I think that made it easier for him to speak. "Before I stood a gate," he said, "I stood a border, long way from here, another kind of service, the kind they don't put a red coat on. There was a village we came through more than once, and there was a man in it, a quiet man, well-spoken, everybody's friend, who had a way with the children of the place, sweets in his pocket, errands he'd send them on. Nobody thought a thing of it because he had a way of making not thinking feel like good manners." A pause, the length of a held breath. I was young. "I saw a child of that village go quiet the way your little princess went quiet, stopped playing, kept her back to the wall. And I told myself it wasn't my post and I had my orders, and a soldier doesn't go making trouble in a friendly village on the strength of a girl who won't say why she stopped playing. So I stood my post. I did the correct thing." His voice did not change, and that was the worst of it. By the time anyone would hear it, it was a great deal later than it should have been, and a child had carried alone for a long time, a thing no child should carry a single hour. She lived. She grew. But I've thought about that girl every day I've stood a gate since, Master Ashcombe, and I made myself a promise standing over her that I have kept in front of me like a drawn line, that I would never again stand still and correct while a child went quiet in front of me because a grown man had taught her that her own true word was a dangerous thing. Never again. Not for an order. Not for a warrant. Not for my post. I did not know what to say to that, and I had the wisdom for once to say nothing. "So when the household sends me a memorandum," he went on after a time, "and tells me I'm off this gate at the turn of the month, and I do the arithmetic and I see what it's for, I'll tell you the truth of what's in me, and then I'll never say it aloud again. There's a part of a man that's glad of an order like that wants it, because if they march me to the outer courts, then it's not my post anymore and it's not my line to hold, and whatever happens to that little girl after, I can say it wasn't mine to stop. That's the comfort the order offers. I've taken that comfort before. I know exactly what it tastes like. His gloved hand tightened once at his side and went still. I won't take it twice. They can have the post. They can have the name. But I've stood over the cost of doing the correct thing while a child went under, and I will not do it again. And if it takes a memorandum and a warrant and the whole household office to make me choose, then I choose. Let the boy point. I'll be off this gate and across that corridor before the paper hits the floor. The dark thinned toward gray while he spoke, and the shapes of the corridor came up out of it: the schoolroom door, the nursery stair, the long stone run to the gate. And I understood that I had been standing all autumn beside a man who was not merely disciplined but haunted, and that the stillness the tourists came to gawp at was not emptiness and was not even only duty. It was a man holding a line he had once failed to hold, holding it now with everything he had, waiting for the one thing that would let him cross it clean. He did not need the household's permission. He did not need mine. He needed a child brave enough to point, and he had spent 3 years quietly making himself the kind of man a child would dare to point to. I went in before the bell and washed my face and put on the day like a coat, and I did not tell the children any of it. But I looked at the gate differently after that, and I have looked at every such man differently since. You think the wall is there to keep you out. Sometimes the wall is a man standing over a grave he dug by standing still, determined that the next time the ground opens under a child, he will be already moving. He came at the middle of the afternoon, and he did not come alone, and he did not come as a hunter. He came as a man closing a lawful book, which is the most dangerous way such a man can come, because everything about it is in order. I heard them on the stair, 2 sets of feet where there had only ever been Rusk's soft ones. I went to the schoolroom door. Rusk came up first, the ledger against his chest, the warrant on its ribbon, and behind him, to my dismay, came Varric himself, the controller, dry and busy, and holding a paper of his own, and I understood before either of them spoke that the machine had sent a second wheel to turn the first. Rusk was not going to hunt the child in a garden today. He was going to walk into the children's own rooms under the controller's warrant and turn them out in front of everyone, lawfully, correctly, and find the box that a 9-year-old had refused for weeks to give up, or, failing to find it, brand her the thief he had promised to brand her, in daylight, with an officer of the household as his witness. Master Ashcombe. Varric did not look at me as at a man. He looked at me as at an obstacle to be rooted around. Master Rusk's engagement closes today. Certain effects on the late Queen's schedule remain unaccounted for. Under the warrant it falls to us to examine the children's apartments before the inventory is sealed. You will stand aside and keep the children quiet while the examination is made. The children's apartments, I said. You mean to search a 9-year-old's nursery? I mean to complete a lawful inventory, said Varric, and I will not debate it with the schoolmaster. Stand aside. Behind me, the children had come to the schoolroom door, all 3. I heard Bram's quick breath and felt Malin's hand find the back of my coat and Torin come up level with my elbow, and I tried to put my arm back to hold them behind me and could not reach them all. Rusk's eyes went past me to them and rested that leisurely, cold resting on Malin, and he smiled the correct smile and said gently to her over my shoulder, as though we were all friends here, "It needn't take long, little princess. If there's anything of your mother's you've been keeping safe, any little box, now would be the time to be a good girl and show us, wouldn't it?" And Malin made a sound I had not heard from her in all those weeks, a small broken sound, and pressed her face into my back, and I felt the whole of her weeks of terror go through her in that one instant: the garden, the stair, the candle at the door, the word thief. the place where bad children go, and I thought, standing there useless with a controller's warrant in my face, that the man was going to win. That he was going to walk past me into that nursery and turn it out and take the box or take the child's name, and there was nothing a tutor with ink on his cuffs could do to stop a warrant on a stair. That was when Torin let go of my elbow and stepped past me. He was 11 years old. He came to the top of the terrace stair, past me, past Rusk, past Varric, out into the open of the corridor, and he did not go to the controller and he did not go to the ledgerman. He turned and he walked the length of the corridor, past all of them, past me, his back straight and his jaw set to the gate, to the red tunic that had stood its last watch there all afternoon without moving, to Sergeant Osric Fenn. And he lifted his arm, and he pointed back down the corridor at the soft-spoken man with the ledger, and he said it. He said it clearly, so that it carried the whole length of the stone, so that Varric heard it and Halsey heard it on the nursery stair, and I heard it and the man himself heard it. That's him, that's the man who's been frightening my sister. His name is Silas Rusk. He chased her round the ice house and he came to our door in the night with a candle and he told her he'd say she was a thief and have her sent away if she didn't tell him where Mother's box is. He's been doing it for weeks. He frightened her so she can't even say it herself. His arm did not waver. His voice did not break. So I'm saying it. It's him. He's the one. For one held breath, the corridor was perfectly still. And then Sergeant Osric Fenn came off his post. I had wondered in the small hours of that autumn what it would look like when the wall finally moved, whether it would be a terrible thing, a soldier's fury let off its chain. It was not. That is the thing I most want to set down because it is the whole of what the man was. He did not lunge and he did not roar. He came off the gate the way he did everything, with a terrible economy, every motion exact and none of it wasted. And by the time Silas Rusk had understood that the child's word had actually moved the statue, by the time the smile had begun to change on his soft face, the guardsman had crossed the corridor and was between Rusk and the children, and it was done, and no one had been struck at all. Silas Rusk, said Fenn, his voice was level. His hand had closed, firm and without cruelty, on the man's arm above the elbow, the trained hold of a man who knows exactly how much force a thing requires and uses not 1 ounce past it. You are detained. You'll come with me to the guardhouse and you'll answer for what you've done in this wing. You'll not touch these children again, nor speak to them from this moment. Take your hand off me. Rusk's voice had lost its softness all at once. Underneath it was something flat and ugly. I am here under warrant. This man is assaulting an officer of the household in the discharge of a lawful Varric. Varric, you witness this. He has laid hands on a warranted man on the word of a child. He has, said Varric, and stepped forward, gray and furious. Sergeant, you will release Master Rusk at once. At once, do you hear me? You are relieved of this post as of tonight regardless, and if you compound it with this, you'll answer to the master of the guard for assault, and for abandoning your station on the raving of a boy who... On the word of a child, said Fenn. He did not raise his voice. He said it into Varric's fury like a stone set down on a table, and it stopped the controller mid-word. You keep saying it as though it's the weak part, Fenn went on, and his hand did not loosen on Rusk's arm. On the word of a child, as though a warrant's the strong thing and a child's the weak one. I've stood this gate 3 years, controller. I've watched that little girl stop counting the fish in that basin, because this man taught her that if she said one true word out loud, it would go badly for the people she loves. I've watched a boy write down a stranger's hours on a slate, because not one grown soul in this house would hear him. Your warrant let this man into a nursery in the dark with a candle. Your lawful inventory is a search for a paper a dying queen hid to protect her own children from exactly this. So no, I don't take my hand off him. The prince named him. I told the tutor, and I'll tell you, the day one of these 3 points at a man and tells me true he's the one frightening them, I act at once and I answer for it after. Here's the after. I'm ready for it. Are you? Varric's mouth worked. He was a creature of the machine, and the machine had, for once, no form to hand him. A guardsman detaining a warranted man was a scandal, but a guardsman standing in a corridor with his hand on a stranger who had come to a nursery door in the night was a thing no controller wanted to be seen ordering released, not with a nurse on the stair, and a tutor as witness, and a boy still standing with his arm not yet fallen. And into that hanging, poised, breathless moment, the moment where the whole autumn tipped one way or the other, came, from the foot of the far stair, a voice that belonged to none of us and settled all of it. "Release him," it said. "You will do no such thing. Sergeant, you will hold that man exactly where he is." Princess Adela had come. The king's sister, plain-tongued, middle-aged, the one person in the house who asked the question everyone else was too clever to ask, came up the stair with two of her own people behind her and a look on her face like weather coming in off the sea. And I learned afterward how she came to be there at that hour, and it is worth the telling. Halsey, God bless her stubborn heart, when she had seen the controller and the ledgerman go up the stair together, had not wrung her cloth and waited. She had gone the back way fast, past every proper channel, and got herself in front of the one member of the royal family whose steward had once, weeks ago, received a tutor's blocked request, and being a decent man, had never quite forgotten it. Adela had come at a near run. And she had come, as it happened, not alone in spirit, for she had that morning had a rider from the west with word that the king her brother was a day's ride from home and coming fast, having at last, through what channels I never fully learned, been told plainly that his dead wife's rooms were being turned out and his living daughter waking screaming, and being the kind of man who, told that plainly, dropped a treaty and rode. But the king was a day off, and Adela was here now, and here was enough. "Your Highness," Varick began, "the warrant." "I have heard about the warrant," said Adela, "from the top of that stair to the bottom of it, and I have heard the boy, and I have heard the sergeant, and I find, controller, that I believe the boy and the sergeant, and I do not believe the warrant, and I will tell you the plain reason why." She turned to Rusk, and looked at him the way you look at a thing you have found under a lifted stone. Because an honest valuer counts a dead woman's jewels in her rooms in the daylight. He does not go to a child's door in the dark. Halsey told me about the candle, sir. Explain to me the candle. Silas Rusk did not explain the candle. That was the moment the whole thing broke, and it broke not with a confession but with a silence. The man had no answer for the candle that did not damn him, and a clever man knows when silence is his last and worst friend, and he chose it, and the choosing was as good as a signed page to every soul in that corridor. "Hold him, sergeant," said Adela. "Master Ashcombe, take those children to the nursery and stay with them. Controller, you and I are going to walk to that office of yours, and you are going to lay every paper of this inventory on the table in front of me, and if I find one line of it crooked, I will know exactly whose hand held the pen, and it will not be this valuer's, will it, because a hired valuer does not think of any of this on his own." She let that hang, and I saw Varick go the color of the stone. Someone engaged him. Someone warranted him. Someone wanted a certain paper never found. "We'll have the whole of it before the king's home, and the king will be home tomorrow. Move." They took Silas Rusk away that afternoon, and I want to be exact about how, because it is the measure of the whole house at its best, and it is the opposite of everything the man had done. He was not struck. He was not thrown down a stair, or made an example of in the yard. Sergeant Fenn walked him to the guardhouse with that same firm, unhurried hold, and there he was handed to the officers of the household military police, who took his name and his warrant and his leather case of instruments, and lodged him, and charged him, in due form, on the sworn word of a controller compelled to swear it, and a nurse and a tutor, and chief of all, a boy of 11 who gave his account to the officers as steadily as he had given it in the corridor, with unlawful entry, with intimidation, and, when the papers were opened, with a good deal more. He was held to answer to the law, not to any man's temper. That is what a lawful hand looks like, and I set it beside the memory of a candle at a nursery door so that the reader can see the difference the children were taught that autumn. That the strong protect the small by binding themselves to the law, not by escaping it. The box was found that same evening, and it was Malin who gave it up, and no one made her. When Adela had gone down to the office with Varric, and the corridor was quiet, and the red tunic was back, for Finn had walked from the guardhouse straight to his gate and taken up his post again, last watch or no last watch, because no one had yet found a man to relieve him, and he would not leave the children unwatched for a memorandum. Malin came out of the nursery on her own feet. She went to Finn. She stood in front of him and held up her fingers, all of them, twice, and said, 14. And then she said, in a small, clear voice, the secret she had carried alone for 2 years. That mother's box with the bird on the lid was behind the loose green tile at the back of the low blue chamber, low down, where a little girl could reach it and a grown man would never think to look, and that mother had said to keep it until she was big, and that she thought, her chin trembled, she thought she was big enough now. She was. Finn did not fetch the box himself. He sent for Princess Adela because it was not a guardsman's to open, and Adela came, and it was drawn out from behind the green tile exactly where the child said, dusty and small and cool, the enamel bird bright under 2 years of dark. Inside was the folded testament in the late Queen Isolde's own hand, under her own seal, witnessed and whole, her children's inheritance, set down by a dying mother who had trusted it to no office and no lord and no new wife, but only to a 7-year-old in a hiding place in time. It had survived the whole hunt because the hunter had never once imagined that the thing he sought had been kept safe, all along, by the very child he had tried to frighten out of keeping it. The king came home the next day, and I will not pretend to have been in the room when the accounting was made, for a tutor is not summoned to such rooms. But the house learned the shape of it, as a house does. It learned that the inventory had been no honest inventory, that Sela's rusk had been engaged and warranted through the queen consort's own household, on Morwenna's instruction, to find and to suppress the late queen's testament before the children came of age, so that the estate held in trust for them might instead be quietly folded away, recorded as unaccounted and lost. It learned that, when the king laid the testament and the ledgers side by side, and heard the candle explained by the silence that could not explain it, and heard from his own sister and his own son what had been done in his own east wing while he ground at a treaty in the west, he did not rage. The king was not, by all accounts, a raging man, but that something in him went very quiet and very cold, and that the queen consort's warrant was revoked before the hour was out. Her household purged of the men who had drawn it, and the whole matter of her part in it placed before the law and the council to weigh, openly, in daylight, which is precisely the place she had most wished it never to go. The testament was upheld and the trust made fast, sealed now not in a nursery tile but in the treasury under the king's own guard, to pass to Torin and Malin and Bram on the day the eldest came of age, exactly as their mother had written. Justice came, and it came from the king and from Adela and from the law, never from the guardsman's fist, which had never once been raised, and never from the antagonist's hand, which was stopped. As for the memorandum that would have marched Sergeant Osric Finn to the outer courts, it died the quiet death of a paper no one is any longer willing to own. The king, told who had signed the rotation and why, did a thing that is talked of in the wing still. He came himself to the east wing gate, in the gray of the second morning, and stood in front of the guardsman, the way the tourists stand, and Finn snapped to and stood his post, eyes forward, and the king said, so the corridor could hear it, that a guard who came off his post on the word of a frightened child, and answered for it after, was the only kind of guard he wanted between his children and the dark, and that Sergeant Finn would hold the east wing gate for exactly as long as Sergeant Finn wished to hold it, and that no memorandum would ever move him from it again. Then the king, who was not a demonstrative man, put out his hand, not for a salute, but to take the guardsman's, white glove and all, and shook it, and went in to his children. Malin walks across the garden now. I watched her do it this very morning, down the stone stair 2 at a time the old way, Bram tumbling after her toward the basin, and she stopped at the water and counted the carp on her fingers and held the count up to the gate, and the man at the gate did not smile, because he is not permitted to smile on post, but I have learned to read the half-inch his gloved hand moves at his side, and it moved. She sleeps through the nights. She had a bad week of them again when Rusk came before the law to answer, for the sight of him unstitched something, but she went into that room with her brother on one side and her aunt on the other, and gave her small true account to the people whose business it was to hear it, and she came out taller, and she has slept since. Halsey says a fear that is faced in daylight loses the trick of coming back in the dark, and Halsey has raised 3 children and buried a queen's memory in her heart, and I believe her. Torin keeps the slate still. He does not tally strangers on it anymore. There is no stranger to tally. He keeps it, I think, the way a soldier keeps a thing from a hard campaign, not to remember the fear, but to remember that he did not look away from it. He is easier since that autumn, less gone into himself, as though the boy who was so busy watching the world because he did not trust it has decided that the world can, after all, be moved, if you are willing to walk the length of a cold corridor and lift your arm and say a name out loud. He asked me, once, whether he had done right, whether it had been his place, a boy, to point at a grown man in front of the controller. I told him the truth, which is the thing I have tried to set down in the whole of this account, and I will end on it, because it is the lesson I said at the start I never expected to learn from the smallest of my pupils and learned instead from all 3. I told him that a warrant is only paper, and a household is only people, and that the strongest thing in that whole cold autumn was not the warrant or the household or even the good king's justice, mighty as it proved. The strongest thing was a 9-year-old who kept a secret 2 years to honor her mother, and a nurse who ran the back way past every proper channel, and a boy who would not forgive himself for a dare and so found the courage to undo it, and one guardsman who had told a tutor in a gray corridor that there was no warrant in the realm that outranked a child pointing at the man who frightened her, and who, when the child pointed, was as good as his word and acted at once. That is the order worth serving, I told Torin. Not the one built to keep the weak from reaching the strong. The one that, when a child at last finds the courage to reach, has a man standing ready at the gate to answer and answers. He thought about that a while in the circling way he has. Then he said he supposed he had better keep practicing his sums, in case the world needed moving again and he had to be clever enough to help. I told him it very likely would, and he very likely would, and I set him another page of them, and out the window the red tunic stood its post in the level autumn light, and down at the basin a small girl held up 14 fingers to a man who was not allowed to smile, and did.